This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lizzie Bendrick, the Trails Program Manager for the County of San Diego Department of Parks and Recreation. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to share an exciting study with you, one that will connect the San Diego watershed via dozens of miles of continuous trails and amenities. This project has been a work in progress for decades, but was recently prioritized at the County Board of Supervisors level. So here we are here to share an overview of the study, where we are now, who's involved, and what's next. Next slide, please. Here are some of the topics that we will be covering tonight. A little bit of background of the river park and trail, the origins of the study, the analysis itself, and we'll leave plenty of room for questions, answers, and comments. We have a variety of folks on the call from the county, including those from Department of Parks and Recreation, Office of Financial Planning, and then we have our third-party consultants. Echo Northwest is mainly focusing on the funding feasibility analysis, and we have Kearns and West who are focusing on the communications and outreach for the study, all in coordination with the county. So we are using a Zoom webinar platform, so you won't have access to the microphone or camera, but you will be able to write in questions or comments using the Q&A feature. Just click the Q&A icon in your toolbar and type in your question. Either we will respond directly to the answer section, or we'll do our best to address your comment in the live Q&A session at the end of the presentation. You may also want to write down the phone number and meeting ID just in case you lose your internet connection at any point during this meeting. Also, a recorded version will be available online after the presentation is completed. This just shows how you can access the Q&A section on a mobile device. It's in the bottom right corner of your screen. Now, to begin, the San Diego River. The San Diego River watershed is home to millions of people and many state and federally listed endangered plants and animal species. It flows through the city of San Diego, the city of Santee, Lakeside, county land, multiple tribal governments, and the Cleveland National Forest. The vision is to establish a trail system from the mountains to the ocean. This connected system would serve as the unifying thread for the San Diego River Park system and will offer recreational opportunities and access to park facilities and nature in general. The main trail is called the San Diego River Trail, which is a multi-purpose path for pedestrians, cyclists, equestrians in some areas, and other users. As you can see in this map and mentioned in the previous slide, there are multiple jurisdictions within the San Diego watershed. Many entities along the river are involved in efforts to preserve, restore, and enhance the San Diego River and the surrounding areas. The largest effort is to create a continuous trail along the San Diego River to provide both residents and visitors with an opportunity to explore and appreciate this valuable natural resource. Here's a look at the completed sections in green, the planned sections in yellow, and the existing sidewalks in orange, all in relation to the watershed, which is outlined in blue. There have been numerous efforts to develop a continuous trail and park system along the San Diego River for decades. Groups have developed visions and plans for the project, with years of feedback from multiple stakeholders, including residents, landowners, wildlife, environmental agencies, and other groups. We have listed a few examples here, and we encourage you to connect with these agencies to learn more. Next, I will be passing the mic to Michelle Critchlow to discuss the overview and objective of the study.
Thank you, Lizzie. So we thought it would be helpful to provide a bit of history that led us to this funding feasibility study for the San Diego River Park and Trail. In March 2021, the County Board of Supervisors Chair, Nathan Fletcher, assembled a task force related to the San Diego River Park and Trail. One of the issues identified by the task force was that there is no set funding source to acquire land, implement trails, and complete other projects along the San Diego River, or for ongoing operations and maintenance. One of the outcomes of the task force was that a long-term funding mechanism was needed to turn this long-time vision into reality. In November 2021, the Board of Supervisors considered this recommendation by the task force, and they allocated $500,000 to hire a consultant to assess long-term funding mechanisms that could be implemented to pay for various aspects of a broader and connected San Diego River Park. The overall objective for this funding feasibility analysis is to identify and evaluate candidate funding options to present to the Board of Supervisors. This is to inform their decision of next steps for implementing a funding option for the San Diego River Park and Trail. With that, I will pass our presentation over to Mark Buckley with Eco Northwest.
Thanks, Michelle. We can go to the next slide. So I'm going to give a little overview of our overall approach to this project. We don't have results yet, but I want to let you know what we're planning to do and what kinds of results we can expect. So this chart shows an overall project timeline. And you can see it's focused and relatively accelerated because we have some real objectives to have information available for the Board of Supervisors to use in June. So we have to back up from that. We're putting materials together now, and we'll be producing a board letter and a technical report that describes the options and the underlying economics. So we're economists, but we have a broad team of a whole range of areas of expertise that we brought together for this analysis. There are two key tracks for this analysis. There is a public outreach component to the analysis and a technical component. The two pieces are meant to operate together in a complementary way, in the sense that the outreach does have a purpose of helping us to make sure we're using the best data, that we understand the situations, the perspectives of stakeholders, including business and development. But it also is an important part of making sure this is an inclusive process and that we are striving for equitable outcomes, as well as starting to establish a nice, let's say, a tone and relationship for this park and trail program. In terms of the technical analysis, there is a sequence of technical questions we're going to be addressing. And I'll go into this in a little bit more on some of the following slides, where first of all, we need to understand what are the investments that are necessary to complete the trail on the park system. What do those require? What are the costs that will be necessary? And where are those costs likely to fall in terms of jurisdictions and types of costs, including costs over time? Then we need to be able to understand who is going to benefit, what are the types of benefits, and that's a key piece of understanding what are the best opportunities to develop new funding sources to provide those efforts. So the cost and benefit information then feeds into our evaluation of the whole range of available funding options. I'll touch on some of those, and we'll be going through a careful empirical process to look at the technical feasibility and appropriate fit of the various available options and their capacity to sufficiently fund the types of costs and the quantities of costs that we'll need to see. We also know that we want this project to be very actionable. So a key element of our full report is to identify what those next steps are for the county and the other partners that will hopefully be involved in terms of other jurisdictions, private developers, tribes, Forest Service, as we move forward with this. We can go to the next slide, please. So place we always want to start in this kind of question is, what are the benefits? So we recognize that there's a whole range of benefits, and it's important to highlight that there are a whole range of habitat environmental benefits, that there are some real improvement opportunities here for the San Diego River corridor in terms of habitat, water quality, invasives management, and the recreation benefits and cultural and educational benefits that go along with that. And of course, there is the trail usage in terms of recreation, travel across multiple modes, hiking, biking in certain areas, horseback riding. And this is an important part of active transportation and its role in the community. There also are ambitions to see this as a way to connect the region and connect communities across the county. and help to turn more of the community, both from the public and the private side, towards appreciating the river corridor and developing with a focus on really seeing the benefits and the value that can be generated there. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we have a careful outreach plan here as part of this process. Again, this is intended both to collect data and inputs for the analysis, but also to promote inclusiveness and participation. We recognize there have been efforts in the past in terms of planning, design, and questions of funding for the San Diego River Trail and the corridor. And not everyone was necessarily always included, but the county is striving to make sure that everyone feels welcome and that all the voices are heard. This is just an example of some of the communities and organizations that we've been in touch with and that we're relying on for information. But again, this is probably the start of a conversation, start of a relationship, although the priority currently has been on collecting the data that we need to understand the funding needs and evaluation of the suitability of the various funding options. Next slide, please. An important part of this whole question is understanding the diversity and range of the kinds of costs that are going to be faced. This isn't just the cost of building the trail or even just the cost of maintaining, that there's all sorts of planning, coordination, design, permitting, there can be mitigation. The long-term operation is potentially a complex question as we think about multiple jurisdictions and public and private land. And acquisition is a real issue. We recognize that there is an effort to be as efficient with public resources as possible, but this is a priority, and connecting the full corridor is an important step in this process, which will likely require some acquisition. Maybe it's in terms of easements. And we want to acknowledge that there are extensive roles for private development as land is developed in the corridor, and there are investments made by developers and property owners. That will be an important piece of the overall cost of seeing this full corridor and trail system come to fruition. Next slide, please. So when we're thinking about this, there are important principles, and this is one of the areas that we've been really trying to reach out to the community when we think about what are the priorities to consider. We want to evaluate the options, not just on feasibility, but how well they suit other objectives for the region. And we, as I've said many times, we want to be efficient with public resources. State and federal grants play an important role in these kinds of recreation, transportation, public infrastructure investments, and we want to be able to continue to utilize those. And similarly, private development business has played an important role, and again, that needs to be recognized, and there needs to be room in any funding strategy for that to continue at a strong and healthy level. We know there are all sorts of coordination issues across the different jurisdictions, and the various property ownership issues and the trajectories for land use over time. And we know that we need to think about the benefits that are coming from this, because that's really the most exciting area, and I think where most of the attention is focused in terms of funding, is how these investments can generate value, and that value can help to support those very investments that generate the value. I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to some of the funding options. And similarly, there is always an equity component to this, and we have an equity lens that we'll be applying. So the overall equity, diversity, inclusion concerns and priorities for the county and these communities will play an important role as we evaluate the options and think about what's going to be the best set of recommendations. Next slide, please. So we, as I mentioned, we do want to look broadly at the various funding options that we have in terms of potential for consideration. Certainly thinking about how parks and trails in San Diego County and across the state are currently being funded. So there is a general fund component, which includes property tax and sales tax. And as I mentioned, state and federal grants have always been an important role and played an important role in this process. But when we think about development and use, there's a whole range of fees and charges that tend to come into play as well. And developers, again, play an important role in this piece of it. Parkland dedication ordinance, for example, is one of the ways that developers are able to contribute and have played roles in terms of dedication of land or funds to support the needs to expand the overall availability of parks and trails as the community grows in this kind of area. So just sort of walking through some of these key examples here. One of the most important that has had attention are these infrastructure tax districts. And there are several varieties of those. The Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District is one in particular that's seen quite a bit of success across the state, including in San Diego County, whereby the key principle underlying that is that you're not increasing the taxes. There are no new taxes, but when investments lead to increase in value and property value and lead to increases in total tax revenue from existing tax pathways, that a portion of that can be dedicated to go back and pay off some of the borrowing that was made to make those investments in the first place. So we are doing our due diligence across the full range of financing options, but we want to point that out as one of the key areas that we've been looking. There are a whole variety of tax increment financing options, but EIFDs are certainly one that have been used in this kind of context and seem particularly promising. There are issues, though, as we mentioned, or as I mentioned earlier, in terms of different kinds of costs and the suitability of various mechanisms, that this is probably going to be sort of a portfolio or layered cake approach, in that the different categories of costs might need to rely on different types of funding. And so we have community facility districts, maintenance assessment districts, special assessment districts, some of these other kinds of tools that communities have used to fund maintenance and operations over time for public infrastructure of this sort. So again, we are in the process of evaluating these options, working with experts and communities that have used these tools before, and modeling empirically what the revenue potential is across the various options that seem to be a good fit. If that'll go to the next slide, I think I might be passing it back to Lizzie at this point.
Yep, that's me. Thank you, Mark. Again, the purpose of this meeting is to give an overview and to inform the folks of the board-directed funding feasibility study for the San Diego River Park and Trail, which is ongoing. So there are a couple ways to stay involved. You can visit our parks development page using this QR code here. You can let us know how you feel about the study by taking an upcoming survey, which will be listed on that parks page. You could participate in the May public meeting. Those specifics will be listed on the website as well, and also attend the June Board of Supervisors meeting. You can also send me an email to get on the distribution list so I can email you the survey directly and any other upcoming public meetings. And with that, I believe we are going to head into the Q&A section. So just a reminder, here is the Q&A little toolbox. So that's what you want to click. So we're using that platform. You won't be able to have your camera on or mic, but you could write in those questions and comments using that feature. And we'll do our best to respond directly in the answer section, or we'll do our best to address you during this current session. So with that, I would like to introduce Jessica Geisler, who will be managing the Q&A session.
Hi there, Lizzie. Thank you so much. And welcome to everybody who's joining us on tonight's public meeting. We are so glad you're here and you're able to look at our presentation and the information that we've compiled to date. As a reminder, yes, please use that Q&A pane and we will pull the questions and comments from there and engage staff appropriately. The chat is really just for us to share some general information. So if you have questions about contact information or links, we will post those details in the chat. We do have our first question. This one's coming in from Mark, and Mark is asking about stakeholders and the role that property owners play on that overall stakeholders list. So I actually want to hand this question to our Mark to provide an update on who we've reached out to for our community outreach plan.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that question, Mark, and we actually have spoken. And I recognize that this is probably an important distinction that we probably can do a better job of calling out. I think when we think about development and business and the stakeholder community in general, we certainly recognize private property ownership as an important piece of that. And I also recognize we might not have mentioned, although Lizzie did, I might have failed to on the outreach piece, that we do have a survey that will be open on the website that will be deployed soon. And one of the purposes of that is explicitly to make sure that individuals throughout the community, including property owners, have a venue and opportunity to express their voice. So that's an important clarification. Thank you. And yes, they are certainly private property owners are an important stakeholder that we have included and want to engage.
Great, thank you. Can you talk a little bit, since we have you here on screen, about next steps with regard to public outreach? So outside of this public meeting, what's happening next, if you want to pull up that process slide again, and how can our participants remain involved?
Yeah, I guess I'll say, are we talking about the last slide here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right there.
Yeah, I'll say that we still have a whole range of interviews and meetings underway, and we will have the survey, as I mentioned, as well as I know that we had on the final slide, there will be opportunities to stay on lists, and we have a website. There will be another public meeting before the June board meeting, so we do plan to present results at a public meeting in May. I'm not sure if Lizzie, if there's anything I'm missing, or anyone else from our team that we should mention.
I know, Lizzie, we have a survey that is in the works right now. Can you speak to that?
Oh, yeah, that was the survey I was mentioning. Sorry, Lizzie, do you want to speak to that?
Oh, you can go ahead. Oh,
well, I think just that it's a relatively simple open survey. It's not necessarily trying to assess sort of an overall sentiment or opinion survey. This is really a survey to gather perspectives and input and data. So again, that will be an opportunity for people to write into us in terms of ideas and concerns and considerations they want to make sure we have in mind as we put together this report.
All right, thank you. We have a question coming in from Robin. Robin's asking if we anticipate whatever funding mechanism or mechanisms are selected, do we anticipate those will be going to the vote of the people? So I can hand this one, I believe, to Mark, maybe to talk about what the authority and prioritization would look like once those funding recommendations are presented.
Yeah, that's a good question. And there are certain options that would require voter approval. Some of the special district types of funding mechanisms would potentially have local community votes necessary for them to move forward. Now, an EIFD doesn't explicitly need a vote by the public to be implemented, because it's basically a jurisdiction taking tax revenue that it's going to receive anyways and dedicate it to a specific purpose. But there are certainly opportunities to be sure that the public's input is included across the range of options. Does anyone have other specifics in terms of voting that we'd want to mention that I might be missing from our team? I think ultimately it depends, I'll say, on the various funding mechanism, and in the report we'll be describing the circumstances where public vote is necessary for any of the various options.
Great, thanks, Mark. So we have our Q&A pane open right now. As we respond to questions, you are able to see them in the list. We only have one comment in there, so if you've got some questions you want to ask, this is a great time to do it. Robin's asking if we can make sure that questions are posted so you know we're answering them. I love that comment and question. Yes, we will make sure that you can see those items. Transparency, of course, is key in any of these processes. So thank you for voicing your opinion there. And hopefully you will get a chance to see all of those different questions that come through. So while we're waiting for other questions, let's see here. Let's see. Oh, here's a great one. Okay. How does the infrastructure district compare to a tax finance to a redevelopment district? And I believe this would be a good question for Laura or Mark.
Do you want to take this one, Laura? It's up to you.
Sure, I can start and you can jump in. So tax increment financing is a form of tax financing that takes the increment. So enhanced infrastructure financing districts are one of those. There's a number of other ones, each with their own requirements. We've identified, I think, 2 or 3 that are similar to EIFDs that fall under that increment financing. A redevelopment district differs, and these are all sort of questions where there are different terms for things and they're defined differently, but things like a community facilities district, for example, or a maintenance assessment district are options where people choose, those are voter approved types options where people choose to dedicate and increase their taxes and dedicate those funds towards paying for maintenance of something like a park or trail, for example. There's many other redevelopment districts out there for things like affordable housing, transit. A lot of those aren't particularly suited for the San Diego River Park and Trail. And so we discuss those as the level of appropriate and viability of use in the report. Mark, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the difference in the label of a whole range of different either tax increment or assessment, community, sort of self-taxation kinds of programs come down to what the purpose is. And state law has been evolving rapidly in recent years in terms of the opportunities communities have. And some of the, for example, in terms of the redevelopment district question, has to do with the ways that the funds can be used and potentially certain requirements on funds. As Laura was saying, some have requirements for a certain portion to go to affordable housing or towards public transit or access to public transit and the like. So again, it's an evolving landscape, and ultimately the differences probably largely come down to what kind of project. And there isn't sort of a particularly wide range of options that fit well for a trail and park type of system. That's one of the real appeals of EIFDs, is that they are actually well suited and designed to have been used for these kinds of investments in the past.
Great, thanks, Mark. All right, so we had a question from Marianne. Marianne was asking what the process was for notifying the public of this meeting. Great question. We posted information to our website and our social media channels. Those include Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We also have had a flyer that was created, and that was distributed to a pretty large stakeholder list. But Lizzie, if you want to speak a little bit about the outreach that you've done to different partner agencies, that might help to kind of clarify that for the folks on this meeting.
Okay. Hi, Marianne. So as Jessica said, we did a lot of emailing, we did a lot of website, social media posts, all of that fun stuff. But a lot of the people that I sent the emails to were stakeholders that we met with, and anyone that said they were interested, we got outreach from people that heard about the task force and they said, hey, we want to learn more. So we set up a meeting with them. And so I encourage you, if you are interested in the study and want to learn more and think could have good input, we would love to meet with you. So I do encourage you to reach out to me. I believe, Marianne, you have my direct email, or you could do the trails email at sandiegocounty.ca.gov.
So Lizzie, while I have you here, we have another question from Marianne. And Marianne was asking, this study was only for the San Diego River Park Trail. Will there be any other additional studies conducted for other regional trails?
That is a great question. So the reason we partly started this feasibility study, it was board directed. So back in March of, and James, if you don't mind going back to the timeline, that'd be great. Back in March, oh, it's right here. I'm so sorry. Back in March 2021, Chair Fletcher, Supervisor Fletcher created a task force. And in November 2021, those funds were allocated to do this study. And so this project has been in progress for decades. And I believe that's why it was chosen by the task force. So moving forward, I would love to do a feasibility of every trail. That's my job as trail program manager. But as for the process, I'd have to get back to you on that.
All right, thanks, Lizzie. All right, so Lane had a similar question about public outreach, kind of going back to that previous question, just how are stakeholders being identified and included in the process? Lane is with the Mission Trails Regional Park Foundation, and they definitely want to be involved in this process. Very cool. We are stoked to have you part of this process. We'll make sure that Lizzie has your contact information, or please feel free to reach out to her directly so you can be added to her distribution list for all project updates. We have a comment or a question here from Donna. Donna's asking if we can show our slide again on those funding sources, and also explain where the recording will be posted. Both good requests. So we'll pull up that funding sources slide. And maybe Mark, you want to talk through that stuff at a high level real quick. And then before we get there, the recording for tonight's meeting, Donna, is going to be on sdparks.org. It's our website. We have a public meetings page on our website. So we can add the link to the chat in just a moment, but it'll take about a day for that recording to be completed and uploaded, but you will be able to watch the entire recap of tonight's meeting. So, all right, I'll hand it over to Mark to talk at a high level about those different funding options.
Yeah, and this is just a summary list that is representative, and I wouldn't say necessarily exhaustive, and I realize it's not necessarily self-explanatory either. I think the main point is we want to point out that we are looking across all viable in terms of legally available options for funding, but probably one of the things that's of particular interest is as we think about criteria for evaluating these options in terms of where is there the closest nexus to the kinds of benefits and beneficiaries that we're talking about, and suitability for the types of costs and the timing and sequencing of costs that we can expect to complete the trail system. I would say that we are aware, though, that taxes and tax revenue are an important part of this. So we need to be careful there. There's obviously competition for scarce public resources. This is a priority, but again, it's a priority that we're trying to find a way to implement in as equitable and sort of streamlined of an approach as possible. I'm not sure if folks have other questions on some of the specific options. Again, we want to make sure that it's clear that we are not prioritizing. This list doesn't suggest any sort of order right now. I have mentioned that the EIFD's Enhanced Infrastructure Finance District is something that has had a lot of interest and attention, but this is a process of due diligence to review the options. And part of that is looking at how an EIFD and others, what the revenue potential would be under various land use, development patterns, property value sequences and patterns over time. So I don't know, Laura, if there's anything else I'm missing that would help sort of give people an overview of what we're trying to show here.
No, I will just add that our work is really designed to look broadly at all the funding options and evaluate them at a high level to provide that information to the Board of Supervisors for their meeting that's upcoming here in a couple months. And so we're trying to be as comprehensive as possible and lay out all the trade-offs of each of these. So we could talk at length in detail about all of these, but we won't bore you with that unless you would like the details.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, if anybody has any specific questions, feel free to throw them there in that Q&A pane, and we'll make sure to re-engage Laura and Mark to provide a response for you. So Robin has a question regarding El Cajon. Are we working with them, and how do we work with them? And I believe that both Mark and Laura did meet with City of El Cajon, and they were invited to this meeting, but I will let either of you kind of recap that conversation. Laura or Mark, there you are.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure if we have spoken. I don't know if someone from the county has spoken to anyone in El Cajon yet. We recognize that we do need to talk to all the communities. And as I've said, this is still a process that's underway. And we want to have several venues that people can provide input. That the accelerated nature of this project to meet the request and the timeline put forth by the County Board of Supervisors does mean that we need to keep the technical analysis moving quickly. But I don't know, Lizzie or Laura, do you know if we've spoken to someone from El Cajon yet?
Hello. We have not, from what I recollect. We have spoken with many people, but that is most definitely something that we can look into and will be doing as part of the whole study.
All right, thanks, Lizzie. All right, well, we're waiting for more questions to come in. We did have a comment from Robin asking how many people are on the call. We have several dozen people. It kind of fluctuates back and forth, and we also have our panelists in here. But we can include that in the recap that we post onto our website for how many people attended, also how many questions came through, and then that link to the recording. Also, I want to make sure you guys write down Lizzie's email address because that's the best way to receive these meeting invitations. If you don't follow us online or you're not on social media, that will ensure that any future communications outreach is going to include you. So take advantage of that direct email. Lizzie's very quick to respond, and then you'll be on our formal distribution list. All right, so we have a comment here. We at the Mission Trails Regional Park Foundation will be in touch regarding involvement. Awesome, we love to hear that. With more than 2 million park users annually, we at MTRP could definitely help with the community involvement and outreach. That is absolutely wonderful. We are so happy to hear that. I'm sure Lizzie will be reaching out to you directly, probably just following this meeting. Again, if you don't have her email address, make sure you've got that. So you guys can start those conversations and be a part of that stakeholder process moving forward. Okay, let's see here. Any additional questions?
Yeah, if I could just respond maybe to a few of these comments in general regarding involvement in the process. I think it's important to reiterate that our study is a focused economic financial analysis, and this is by no means setting the pathway or a full plan for the trail park. That we are relying exclusively on existing planning documents that Lizzie laid out at the beginning. Just want to make sure that everyone on the call recognizes that there is a much larger process for the full implementation, design, management, governance of the trail system, and this is just a little piece of that process.
That's a great reminder. Thank you, Mark. Yes, this is an exploratory process to see what options we have available to us so that we can present those options to the County Board of Supervisors. But you're right, in no way does it denote what is happening next with our trail system and how projects could potentially be prioritized. So good comments there. Let's see here. Do we have any other questions coming in from the group? Don't see anything yet. Let me see if we have any content we could potentially share with you. Let's see, it looks like we've covered most of the topics we plan to cover today. I'll give it just another minute here. Again, we have our website, stparks.org, and that's where we will be posting project information. We did create a dedicated web page for the San Diego River Park and Trail, and that's where we're going to continue to post links to meetings like this, flyers, information, stakeholder lists, kind of everything is going to live in that area. So we'll make sure if you're connected to Lizzie that you have a link to that page as well, and maybe you can bookmark it. And we also want to encourage you to attend any of those future conversations and public meetings that will be coming up later this year. All right. Well, I don't see any more comments coming through. We're going to be posting the link to the meeting page in our chat in just a moment. So one of our team members is going to take care of that for you. I will hang on here for just another minute to see if anything else pops in. I'm surprised we were able to get through this so quickly. We had so much content to share. But again, it is a very high level look at what's going on right now, just to make sure that we're being transparent in process and that we're sharing information as we receive it. So, all right, looks like that link just posted. And with that, I think my role is done here. It's been a pleasure to serve as your host for the Q&A session of tonight's meeting. I look forward to seeing you at a future meeting. Please make sure you connect with Lizzie directly and get on that distro list. And I'd like to thank all the panelists for having me and also all of the guests for hearing me out. So I'm going to step away. I'm going to hand it back over to Lizzie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for coming. You can see the trails at san-diego-county.gov. So, .ca.gov, excuse me. So please email me if you want to be a part of any of the outreach and learning more, as Jessica mentioned. If you want to contact me directly, it's pretty simple. It's lizzie.bendrick and the rest of the county email there. So lizzie.bendrick. I am happy to help and answer questions. And that is it. Thank you all so much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting.